Hi, everyone. This is Samira Daswani, the host of the podcast, The Patient from Hell. I have a very special guest with me, Matthew, here today, who I think has an incredible story and has been willing to share it with the rest of the community, I think for the benefit of others. So, with that, I'm just going to open up. Hi, Matthew. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Matthew, so we opened our conversation this morning by you telling me you moved to Michigan.
I
Can
did.
we, can we start by why you moved to Michigan?
So, my partner and I were living in Nashville. She is a lawyer, and she's a public defender, and we wanted a fresh start, and we came to Detroit for my birthday, and she applied for a job with the state of Michigan and got it, and here we are. I'm just the handsome cancer sugar baby along for the ride.
I love the tone of phrase there. Handsome cancer sugar baby.
Well, it's one of the first things my sister said to me after I was diagnosed. You know, people are sometimes they're they don't know what to say, and it's not like there's a guidebook. Anyway, my sister is sitting in the corner in the hospital room, like 6 or 7 hours after doctors told me I had metastatic pancreatic cancer. And she's like, I don't know what it is, but I think you look more handsome now that you're very sick. My sister, she came with all the hot takes in the cancer ward.
Is this an older sister, younger sister?
No, this is a little sister.
Little siblings are the best. I think I have two younger brothers, and they're identical twins, but one of them is quote unquote younger by a minute. But he definitely plays the I'm the youngest sibling card, and he I think had a similar role in my cancer experience.
The one giving you a hard time.
Or just making lots of fun of it and trying
Yeah,
to raise morale by being, witty and funny, but also secretly freaking the hell out. But
right.
actually trying to have a very good positive outlook on
The
everything.
the funny thing about my sister is that she is like the sweetest, most caring person, and she and I, like, we love each other very much, but we also have a very antagonistic relationship. So I feel like my little sister talks to me in a way she would never talk to anyone else in the world. But I love that kind of relationship with her. I remember the another thing she said to me when I was in the hospital, like the day of the diagnosis. She was All of my friends made such a fuss around me, and that's great, because my sister has two small boys and she couldn't do that. But she was there when I was diagnosed, and she was sitting in the corner, and she was just like, you have so many friends and they love you so much, and I just do not understand why. And we both start laughing, and the nurse in the room looks horrified.
Oh, it's amazing. Matthew, I want to go back to Detroit and Michigan.
Yeah.
So now you're a very handsome cancer sugar baby, but you also had a very very cool backstory of being a geographer.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk about that, please?
I I guess I wanted to become a geographer. I've wanted to become a geographer since the seventh grade. I had this geography teacher in middle school named Dr. Friesman, who was like a very, you know, like austere Puritan, like grandfatherly, long nose that he would look down at you. He was kind of a scary guy. But also he like lived on a sailboat and drove a motorcycle and lectured to us. And I swear that this is real. This happened. He lectured to us through an owl puppet
What?
named Dr. Geo, and he would just like speak to this owl puppet, this like very serious, very grandfatherly man who who had a PhD. His name was Dr. Friesman, right? He taught middle school geography, and he was terrifying, and also the puppet, which maybe made him more endearing or more terrifying, maybe both simultaneously. It's really difficult to say. But since that class, I've wanted to be a geographer. And before all of this started, I was a PhD candidate in geography at the University of Kentucky. And my research focused on the development of geographic ideas. So I'm interested in the way ideas of space and place developed over time. It's more complicated than that, but that's the quick and dirty of it.
Okay, so here's the problem with having a podcast that I host. I get to decide where we go with the conversation, and I know we're supposed to talk about pancreatic cancer, but
Yeah.
I love geography.
Okay.
I
Well, these are
absolutely
all these scary books behind me. These are. I had to position the camera in such a way to hide the disquieting number of books.
Oh, that's okay. Don't worry. I mean, if you look behind me,
I
oh,
mean, there's just
okay. This is great. All right, so let's actually, if you're okay with it, let's stick with
yeah.
geography for a while.
Mhm.
Partly because my favorite subject in high school was also geography. I didn't know you could be a geographer. I wanted to be a cartographer and an ichthyologist,
Yeah.
scientist, and I was pretty convinced I was going to do both those things. And I used to love map making. It was just a thing I liked, but it's not a thing you can do in India when you grow up in high school.
So I actually have a book about the history of geography in India.
What? Okay,
Yeah,
tell me more.
that's part of the being studying the history of geographic thought is that I have books about the development of the discipline in various countries, and I've read the book. I don't know where it is, but when I find it, I'll just send it to you.
Perfect. But I would love to talk a bit more about time and place.
Yeah.
So your thesis topic. Why did you pick that? How did you pick that?
So my master's research was kind of traditional political geography. I studied Jewish, Zionist, and anti-Zionist activist networks and how they formed and what the implications of that were for thinking about geopolitics more broadly. And when I moved to the PhD, I became interested in how ideas of space and place were used to think about ideas of race and ethnicity. Mostly, I'm interested in issues of identity and difference broadly, but the focus of my dissertation research was how geographers and related, I don't know, spatially interested social scientists used ideas of space and place to think about race.
Huh.
And there are a lot of ways that social scientists have done that. My research focused on how they used Jewish spatiality, ideas of about Jewish geography to think about race in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. You've maybe heard the phrase rootless cosmopolitan, right? The kind of traditional anti-Semitic canard is, I mean, the Soviet version of a anti-Semitic myth that is 2,000 years old about the wandering Jew, and those ideas of Jewish placelessness became important for how the modern taxonomy of race formed in the late 19th, early 20th century, in the Western Academy. It's not just like there was an idea about race, right? Like the Platonic form of race that that we just had, right? It is an idea that has developed over time. And so I was particularly interested in the rise of the modern university and how, and at that point, no one was really anything. You ever read like a Wikipedia article about a thinker from the 19th century, and it's like, oh, they were a poet, a mathematician, an alchemist, a wizard. Every people, if you were learned, you were just everything, right? You were making eyeglasses. You were like Benjamin Franklin.
Yep, I studied art history, if it helps.
Yeah. So at that point, a lot of early social scientists were medical doctors, anthropologists, and geographers often had degrees in medicine. And there's, if you've watched any, I don't know, for me, it's movies about colonialism, right? It's the doctor who makes a bunch of money and then like wants to go explore the world. And that's I think a common archetype in the history of the social sciences.
Correct. So help me understand. So I'm completely with you. If it helps, and I'm so thrilled that we're talking about this because I never get to do this on this podcast. So
yeah,
it's great. So I studied art history and I studied bioengineering, and
yes.
I was always, and I think I still am perceived as a weird one, right? It's a weird one. It's like you study both those things. And what kept me going actually was the archetypes you're talking about, right? If you go back 100-something years, that was very normal. It was very normal. Like the delineation we make today between art and science, geography and politics, the very many types of social sciences is somewhat artificial because we've created those boundaries for a variety of reasons. And anytime you start blurring boundaries today, everyone kind of like gets freaked out a little bit. But I love that you're talking about that. So if you don't mind, let's keep going down that path. I'd love to better understand when you talk about the early beginnings of what now has become sort of a foundational layer for the taxonomy of the Jewish identity, and that of geospatial work that you do. And we're recording at a very temporally relevant point in time. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how space and time matters in the development of identity. Sorry, I know.
Well,
very
okay.
But in the span of 5 minutes, if you
Sure,
don't
sure.
mind
I think there's a really great book by Bell Hooks where she talks about the importance of place in her life, and how, I mean, she was a Black woman from rural Kentucky, and it's so funny for me how often, like, I mean, Bell Hooks in a lot of ways taught me to think about space and place in the same way, or in a related way that Audre Lorde taught me how to be a cancer survivor. And it's those are both experiences that I've taken a great deal from. I can say from my personal experience that being a mostly Eastern European Jew from New York is a very particular kind of cultural experience. And at the same time, like when I'm 4 years old, we moved to South Florida. I grew up in Palm Beach County in a place called Jupiter, where being a Jew from New York in the early 90s I felt very out of place. I mean, thank God I look so Protestant that, if I kept my mouth shut, no one would know, right? I'm 6 feet tall. I look like I drink mayonnaise right out of the jar. And in a lot of ways, that helped me get through middle school and high school. But I became keenly aware of a liminal suburban American geography that made me feel both out of place in South Florida because I mean, I had this accent. I got made fun of in elementary school. And then at the same time, I would go home to New York and people would be like, you're not from here. And it sounds like a triviality. And in a lot of ways, it is. But it's that experience of being from one place but really being from another, and the complicated relationship between those two things that got me thinking about identity and geography in the first place when I was a little tyke, even before Dr. Friesman lectured to me with his hand up the butt of an owl that he called Dr. Geo. I was thinking about this.
So can we go to where you went, right? So there were a couple of things you mentioned that I think for me, in today's identity of myself, and I'm assuming I'm projecting a little bit on you, but maybe for yourself, now it's not just about your Jewish identity. You've moved to Detroit. I imagine that there's some amount of that playing out right now as well, but there's also the cancer identity.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind talking a bit more about that, like what are the similarities? What are the differences?
Between it's funny, because there is historically such a connection between cancer and the Jewish community. There's a really great book called Freud's Jaw, where I mean it's a discussion of Freud's struggle with cancer. I didn't even realize this. Yeah. If you look for it, you can find there are cancers just everywhere. And if you want to find smart people writing about cancer, there are tons of. I mean, Derrida, Jacques Derrida died of pancreatic cancer, and there's a whole interview in Le Monde where he talks about, he says, my body is at war with itself. Actually, the story of Derrida and pancreatic cancer is really, really interesting, and it's something I'm thinking about writing about. But that's another entryway into what I was going to say, because both Jacques Derrida and Sigmund Freud are such important figures in the Jewish intellectual tradition. Both of them died of cancer. And yeah, I'm BRCA2 positive, or whatever I'm still not clear on the parlance of medicine. But being one of those kinds of people, it's you become very clearly identifiable as Jewish. I think it's like something my oncologist said to me very casually after they discovered the tumor on my pancreas and throughout my gut. He was like, your sister is has BRCA2 and your mom died. Yeah, you're Jewish? Yes, probably. And it's something, it's not like I wasn't offended or anything like that. It's just like, there is a very clear connection historically between narratives of cancer and Jewish identity, and it's one of those ways that you become subject, right? It's like, oh, cancer, BRCA, Jew.
Huh. Okay, I have no words right now. The reason you see me kind of stumped a little bit is, I mean, I'm a breast cancer survivor, right? And BRCA1, BRCA2 are very common. And
Yeah.
I have a lot of Jewish friends who are BRCA positive, a lot.
Yeah.
I have people who've been diagnosed and the people who have not gotten diagnosed yet. I've had people and these are like very close friends of mine. And the way you just framed it, I think I had underappreciated how interwoven those two things are from an identity perspective for people I'm incredibly close to. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's not quite, I didn't hear you say stigmatized, but it feels
Your
almost
made subject.
personal. Like, it feels personal, and it feels I don't know, it I don't know. You're not saying that, I'm saying that, but
No.
it does feel personal. It feels almost like
Yeah,
hmm,
and I think the reason it often doesn't it can be stigmatizing, right? Like there is a narrative of malignancy in the larger history of anti-Semitic discourse, but there's also a very rich history of Jews using biological discourses as a way to respond to anti-Semitism, right? So, and you see this a little play out a little bit in narratives about BRCA, because at the same time that like non-Jews you like often rhetorically use BRCA to identify you, Jews have also used that same biological medical narrative as a way to build community and foster solidarity in a still very much diasporic community.
yeah, yeah. Huh. I I'm struck by what you said, because this is an area where I imagine that the biological identity of the Jewish community has been both used against, and then has been, hopefully to the point you're making, been a impetus for community building and solidarity building. But I imagine that it's been used in both ways. And up until this conversation, I actually, for some reason, had not linked it to the cancer identity. But in hearing you talk about it, it feels so interwoven into medical identity, into the interactions with physicians and the interactions with the cancer system. I'm having a moment of appreciation of how incredibly hard it must be. So,
Mm. Yeah. This is one of those this yeah. Yes.
huh. Okay.
I got nothing.
You got nothing. No, no, I was about to say, I think we've opened a can of worms that is so inherently complicated. We're talking like 200 years of complexity
Yes.
in about 5 minutes. So,
Yeah.
me being both stumped for words is, I think, a fairly expected reaction. Where I wanted
I
to go with
really
it, so go
I
ahead.
really want the whole time I was thinking about this, there's a Law and Order episode. It's an episode of Law and Order Criminal Intent where it's so complicated. It's so complicated and it's so contrived, but there is a anti-Semitism cancer narrative in this episode. And if I can, after this, I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna send it to you. It's too abstract even for me to explain, but it's great. And if you can stand one episode of a police drama, then I suggest it.
Done. Okay. All right. I'm excited. I'll share where my head was. There's an author called Mohsen Hamid. I don't know if you've ever read his work.
Mm-mm.
He, it, this is so temporal, but he's a Pakistani author who wrote. He was in the U.S. and he wrote a few books. One of which I think had a huge, profound impact on me. And this was post 9/11. And the book is called Reluctant Fundamentalist. The reason I am referring to that is less about the content of the book. It's a fiction book. I mean, of course, drawing from personal experiences, but fiction. But his style of writing is something that resonated in the way we were communicating right now, because there was a lot of things that it's a very short book. I'm talking 120 pages, it's very short. And in that book, he does an incredible job of communicating the inherent complexity of identity, and in this case, the Pakistani identity, while in the US as an immigrant post 9/11. But he does it in such a simple fashion, and by simple I don't mean simplistic. It's actually incredibly well executed, but there's so much that he doesn't say, and yet the impact it has on you is one of immense empathy, sadness. It's an incredibly well done book. And what occurred to me in our exchange right now is there was a lot of stuff that was not said. There was a lot of stuff that was implied, suggested, hinted at, but a lot was not said. And I think it just reminded me of his book and how complex the narratives around identity are, how rooted in space and time, and both contemporary and then historical events that have happened. And how, when we enter these conversations, especially when it comes to the medical arena, clinicians have had to develop a shorthand, because you get 20 minutes with the patient.
Yeah.
And in those 20 minutes, if you're a clinician, you're trying to deliver like, hey, here's the cancer diagnosis, here's what we need to do, here's the like timeline, here's the effectively the project management schedule. And yet you have these like currents that are running underneath it that are often, I think to some extent, they just can't be addressed in a 20-minute appointment, but it is running in those moments of interaction. So
I agree with you. I am okay. So for like several years, I taught a class called the Global Dynamics of Health and Disease. I taught these recitation sections for this professor who was he wasn't there for 61 years, but he was there for like 200 years, and he was like a quantitative social scientist, one of the early geographers to study space and health and medicine, an early originator of research on telemedicine. And that class was it ticked one of those boxes that, you have to tick. Even if you want to go to medical school, you need to take a certain number of social science classes. So I had a ton of future doctors as students, and I'm going to be real. Sometimes they can't write for shit. And sometimes, and I think this is in a lot of cases, universities coddle students and allow them to just do what they're good at,
yes,
and get away with not being good at what they're not good at. And it makes doctors, it appeals to a certain kind of personality, that gosh, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush or knock doctors, but like, we can do better, right? We can do better in how we educate doctors in the humanities and social sciences, so that those 20 minutes are more thoughtfully executed.
yeah, I don't think you're painting with too broad a brush. And this is where I think, given my undergrad experiences, I cannot tell you how often I went on the rant you just went on. And it's not just doctors, right? I think it's engineers. I think it's political science. I think it's the politicians. I think it's the leaders. I think it's CEOs. Like, I really think our educational system needs a rehaul, because we do not do a good job of teaching people how to write, to communicate, how to understand complexity and simplify it,
and nuance.
Exactly. It's yeah.
Being a doctor,
on the same page.
being a doctor should be a hard thing to become, and it should be hard in ways that are not directly connected to medicine.
Yes.
You know, I'm the beneficiary of an incredibly thoughtful oncologist, and you know, there are parts of the story that are where that he was not thoughtful.
Yeah.
But I think what I love about my oncologist is that he's a curious person, and he is an indefatigable spirit. And in those moments where he is not thoughtful, you can tell him that he's not that, and I don't know if it's something I'm allowed to do. And I think sometimes I talk to doctors. I think this is my mother. I talk to doctors like they work for me. I do. um and I yeah
Yeah.
if I didn't like what he said, or I thought he wasn't thinking about something in you know, or there were things left unthought, I would say it.
So let's talk about that, right? Because I think that actually that is a very normal theme on this podcast, for what it's worth, is doc patient communications. Because I I would love to better understand why you think doctors work for you.
I think a lot of doctors, in my experience, are I think it's a product of my personality, and I think it's also a way I've found to advocate for myself effectively. That sometimes doctors are not used to being spoken to in a certain way, and if you are willing to get up in their grill a little bit, oftentimes you can get what you want, or you can come to some kind of understanding. And especially, I mean, my oncologist is the chief of oncology at a major cancer research institute, right? Like, he's the boss. And sometimes that colors people's judgments, and sometimes if you shake them a little bit, you can at least you can at least make you might not steer the ship, but like, you can be involved in the direction, right? You're certainly you're controlling the trajectory as a partner, at least.
Can you give us an example?
Okay, so I had this pain after surgery. To make a long story short, I had one aborted Whipple and one successful Whipple, and between that, I did chemo for many months. And at one point, I for months after the first Whipple, I had this pain that was bad enough to get me to see stars, and sometimes like it felt like getting the wind knocked out of me. And I kept telling my oncologist about it, and he kept telling me to eat smaller meals. and and there was very obviously a uh a lack of understanding about pain, and I think that's man, that is complicated by the age of your doctor and the experience of being a doctor through the opioid crisis. but finally, and the nurse practitioner was in the room, I was just like, no, it hurts, and I fall over, and really there was never any resolution. We never had a discussion about what the pain was or why the pain was, and I never got any clarity on that matter, but I did get pain relief. And it took me being like having to be a little mouthy to get my care team, and they are so attentive in so many ways, and good to me, but sometimes like people's judgment is clouded. People's understanding of something as abstract as pain is it something that abstract becomes minimized, becomes marginal, especially if someone has never experienced pain like that, or gone through 2 Whipples and chemotherapy, and it's this is horrible, but one of the things I would say when someone would disregard what I was talking about, or what I was experiencing, is I would say, well, one day you will have metastatic pancreatic cancer, and you'll know, right? It's like my mom would say, one day you'll grow up and you'll see. And of course, I don't wish metastatic pancreatic cancer on anyone. It's fucking the worst. It's horrible. But it's one way of saying it can happen to anyone. And it's another, and it's one way of saying that the experience is difficult to capture and difficult to empathize with unless you have been through it or something similar. If you are a dyed-in-the-wool cancer muggle, if you have just it is totally abstract to you, then sometimes you say crazy things.
Yeah.
Sometimes you say such erasive things that the jerk in me feels compelled to push back.
Yeah. No, I I think you saw me like crack up. It was not because I think it was actually not because I think your reaction was unexpected. It was because it is ridiculous to me that patients have to do that. It truly is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. And the worst part of this is I know for a fact that the oncology care team, including the nurse and the oncologist, are so well intentioned. They are so well intentioned, right? So they are coming at it from such a good place. And then it fails. And it's like.
And that you I was 32 years old and diagnosed with a disease, like the worst version of a disease that mostly affects people in their 70s, right? The chances of getting pancreatic cancer at my age, it's like 0.6 for every 100,000 people. I didn't know how to act. I'm difficult on the best of days.
Yeah.
I did not know how to act. And after a while, I realized that no one knew how to act. And so sometimes we were going to behave poorly. And for me, it's not an if you behave poorly, it's a when and a how, and it's going to happen, and you're going to go out of your mind a little bit, and everyone else is going to lose their mind. They're going to lose their cool around you because you're dying, and you know that, and there's a taboo around that. And I just try. I don't come by grace naturally, but I try, and I certainly don't come by grace as a Jew, because I feel like it's a very Christian thing, but I try so hard to give people the understanding to allow, like, it's not if you mess up, it's like what you do after you mess up.
Matthew, how old are you?
I'm 35.
Okay, so 3 years, huh?
Yeah.
I think you know the data on that. That's actually
Yeah.
that's actually pretty good.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I was at a wedding this past weekend, and someone, a colleague of mine, a former colleague from graduate school, I hadn't seen in a while. She was like, "Oh man, you beat the odds twice." Because like, on the one hand, it's like so hilariously, it's not, I'm not the youngest, I'm not the only one, certainly not. There are others, but it's pretty rare. And then it's not like, and people are like, oh, but they caught it early. And then no, they did not catch it early. In January of 2021, I started experiencing symptoms of obstructive jaundice.
Oh.
So gosh, November is Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month, and we're supposed to be talking about the fucking symptoms of pancreatic cancer, which means that I have to talk about poop constantly. And it's just like, on the one hand, I love talking about it. On the other hand, it's like, can I just have some dignity for once in my life? I started, like, my poop turned white, and my urine was really dark, like coffee dark. And I started experiencing symptoms of itching, really, really intense itching that was so bad that for the 2 nights that I had it, I would like scald my hands and feet under in the bathtub as hot as I could get the water to numb my flesh so that I could sleep. I had no idea what was going on. And finally, I think it was day 3, the second night, after the second night of the really intense itching, I went to an urgent care. I had moved to North Carolina during the pandemic because I had lost my job, and I went there as a place to land. And I didn't have a doctor yet. I mean, I have Crohn's disease. I hadn't secured a GI yet. I didn't know what was going on. I was terrified. I go to this urgent care, and they do a blood test, and like my liver enzymes and bilirubin are really, really elevated. And I remember the young nurse practitioner is shining a light in my eyes because I hadn't turned yellow, and I'm pretty pale. So you know, she was like, she's shining the light in my eyes, and she's like, I don't know, do they look yellow to you? And I remember thinking, I don't know. You have a light in my eyes. You tell me if they're yellow. And it's like one of those, being Jewish but not looking Jewish, having cancer but not looking like you have cancer, having jaundice but not looking like you have jaundice. Why does everything always have to be so fucking complicated? But after I get the blood tests back, and she's like, whoa, not good. Do you have a doctor? And I was like, I was hoping to find one here. And she was like, well, I think you should go to the emergency room. So I went to the emergency room, and it was like during COVID. This is like at the height of COVID. So going to the emergency room I went to in Durham, North Carolina, it was like going inside of a fortress. It was wild. And I'm there for 2 days. They find a stricture in my common bile duct, which is what's causing the really terrifying symptoms. They don't know what is the cause of the a stricture. They put a stent in there, and they say, well, there's a biopsy results we're going to wait for, but sometimes, we're going to put this stent in and maybe it'll stretch it out. And in a few weeks, we'll take the stent out. And in the meantime, we'll wait on these results. And I went home and I felt pretty okay. That these very fancy doctors were, had assured me that, because of my age and relative health, that like there was really nothing to be worried about. And I remember coming home and I called my sister, and because she knew I was in the ER for 2 days, and I wanted to give her a heads up. And she says, "Let me tell me your symptoms." And right, she's a mom. So and a lunatic. So I feel like she's constantly just Googling symptoms, and she Googles my symptoms and she's like, maybe you have pancreatic cancer. And I was just like, I remember my reaction because I don't know a lot about pancreatic cancer at the time, but I knew it wasn't good. And I knew it was like very, very lethal. And I was just like, God damn it, Brittany, do not put the evil eye on me like that. And that's exactly what she did. And I blame her. I 100% blame my sister for giving me metastatic pancreatic cancer. It's all her fault. So a few weeks later, they take the stent out, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna see, the biopsy results were fine. The biopsy results were fine.
It was not.
Brushings, everything was fine. So they took the stent out, and then a few weeks later, the symptoms came back. And then they decided it was my gallbladder. So they took my gallbladder out, which was like necessary, but not sufficient. Because they do end up taking your gallbladder out when you have a Whipple anyway. And then after that, and this whole time, like, at this point, I've had so many MRIs and CTs and ultrasounds and 4 endoscopic ultrasounds, and nothing. So it's like, so they take my gallbladder out and they're like, you're going to be good. Few weeks later, I'm in Kentucky, and the symptoms start to come back, and I couldn't tell if I was just like traumatized by the itching, it was so horrible, or if the itching was coming back. But it did, the symptoms came back, and I went back to North Carolina. And at this point, like, cancer is still not in the wheelhouse of terminology, right? I'm talking to a GI, an endoscopist, I think is the terminology. She's the person who did the ERCP, the endoscopic ultrasound on me like 100 times at this point. This is like the most intimate relationship I've had with a woman at this point, right? Like, she has seen my common bile duct like 100 million times at this point. And before our appointment, I get some of the results from the most recent ERCP back, and they're fine. And I go and I have this appointment with her, and she says to me, well, you definitely don't have cancer. You for sure don't have cancer. I'll never forget this. if you have cancer, I will roll over in my grave. And then 2 hours later, I got an automatic notification with the rest of the results on my MyChart app. And it said, I was at work at the time, it said, use the word adenocarcinoma. And I didn't know that word. But I knew enough that I knew it wasn't good, because cancer words, they all sound like they could be the bad guy in Star Wars. Right? Like sarcoma. There could be like a whole Star Wars storyline. Honestly, are the people who write Star Wars, are they just stealing cancer words? Who's to say? In any case, I flip out because I Google adenocarcinoma, and it's not good. The guy who did my my gallbladder surgery happened to be the one of the hotshot surgical oncologists at the hospital I was at, and so my results were forwarded back to him, and he calls me, and God bless him, he is great. And he looks like the original Superman, the actor who played the Superman in the 1980s. And I feel like that's what you want from your surgeon, right? You want them to look as much like Christopher Reeves as possible. He's got like the butt chin. I think he played football for an Ivy League school. He's from Maine. He was in the Army. It looks like he never has been sick once in his life. He calls me on his cell phone. He is at a conference, and he is like, do not worry. We are going to take care of this. You are going to have what's called a Whipple. He described to me what it was. He says, you're going to be in my office in 2 days. We're going to go through it. You're going to have this surgery. It's going to be incredibly difficult to recover from, but I am confident that this is an early stage cancer. And at this point, my memory is hazy, and, history is written by the winners, and so are your medical records, right? The winners or the losers. And so if I read my medical history, and it said that the surgery was for possible pancreatic or ampullary cancer, but in the moment, it was definitely the latter that was stressed to me, and not the former. Pancreatic cancer was still on no one's tongue. It was not. It was definitely suggested that I had ampullary cancer, which has a much higher survival rate. And so a week later, I'm in his office, or a few days later, I'm in his office, and he's like in full Superman mode, right? He's like, I look up what a Whipple entails, and I think it's one of these Mayo Clinic. They're like, make sure the person who does this knows what the hell they're doing. And so I was like, I didn't really know this guy, and I was like feeling very sheepish, and he was just like, oh no, I did one of these yesterday. I'm gonna do one later in the week. I do a lot of these. And I was just like, okay, cool, man. I just needed to see you, whip it out and put it on the table. I needed that show of confidence. And like a week later, Superman and I go in for surgery, and I wake up, and I don't know if this is on purpose, but the way they had me when I woke up, I couldn't see any clocks. There was like, no one was telling me anything, and I didn't know what time it was. And, but finally, and I had just come out of a pancreatoduodenectomy, right? I was pretty high. But I caught a glimpse of of a nurses watch. And I remember thinking, that's not enough time. But I was still like, I was like singing Frank Sinatra songs to the nurses. I was like in full ham mode. And my sister comes in and the surgeons come in, because I found out that after that they did another Whipple after mine. Once they like closed me up, they had like another, I don't know if it was another Whipple after mine. It was another surgery after mine. So it takes a while, but they come in and my sister is there and she's crying. And I knew it was not good. And my surgeon puts his hand on me and he said, well, we found a tumor on the head of your pancreas. And it has, I don't, and I read my medical records this morning, and those were like, it had metastasized through my gut, throughout my gut, rather. And he said, because of that, we had to sew you back up. This is, and I knew enough, right, that, I've watched Grey's Anatomy. I know. Right, the Whipple is like the cool, interesting surgery. So that's like, if you're a millennial with pancreatic cancer, go watch you some Grey's Anatomy. It'll teach you everything you need to know about the surgery. I promise. I knew enough that it meant that he was telling me that I was going to die. But also the funny thing is, because I'm wearing a gown at this point and I'm underneath this like big blanket, he doesn't really know. He's like trying to do the human thing by like touching me, but his hand is on, he doesn't realize his hand is on the inside of my thigh. And so like the whole time I'm stoned because I've just come out of surgery, and I know in my rational mind that he's telling me very bad news, but like the internal dialogue is like, this seems like a very inappropriate time to be hitting on me. Oh my God, this is amazing. And he says he can tell at a certain point that like I know what's up, and he said, I don't want you to think that way, because I don't believe that you are the average. I think you are 32 years old and you will handle treatment better than a lot of people in your situation, and it sucks. He says you're, young and comparatively healthy. And he was like, and your sister has, there's a history of breast cancer and BRCA in your family. And he's like, if your sister has it, I'm almost certain that you have it. And if that is the case, then there are a lot of targeted therapies that are available to you. And he said, I hope that in 1 year we can come back and try this again. And he said, I don't want you to think that that's what's going to happen, because this is a mean cancer. That's what he said. But I'm going to refer you to this oncologist, and he's the best we have. And I think that in a year, if we're lucky, we can be here again. My oncologist, not so confident. Not so confident. After I bully it out of him, and I abused this poor man, he told me I had 1 to 3 good years left with treatment. And so I spend a week in the hospital, and I watch Harry Potter and I eat chicken fingers every meal for 7 days, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And sometimes my surgeon, he would try and switch the meals on me. And nurses do God's work, honestly. Nurses are such beautiful souls. And they would switch it back for me so I could watch my Harry Potter and eat my chicken fingers and just be depressed. And I was dating a woman at the time, and she was like trying to, like, we'd known each other for a long time, but we had been dating for 6 months. And I remember I was like, you need to get out of here, this is crazy. And she said, no, I love you, we're gonna do this together. And I wish people listened to you when you talk, right? Because I knew that I knew myself, and I am literally the patient from hell. Like, not like, this is not an exaggeration. Like I said, I'm a difficult person. And when I tell people that, they never believe me. There's a belief in like a common rationality that when shit hits the fan, people will behave in a rational manner. And I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. I knew, like, I was the kid who punched doctors and nurses and dentists, and I am so terrified of needles, and it has nothing to do with pain. I think being in a body is disgusting. I just, like, having blood drawn, I can't even watch people get shots on TV. I have to cover my eyes. So I knew that this was going to be horrible. It was going to be so difficult. And I mean, my doctor has got a small glimpse of it while I was in the hospital, because I didn't realize they were going to give me an epidural. And I was sitting in the bed, and I was just like, no, you can do it after I'm asleep, but like, you are not, no. And finally it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, and like they had to get someone from like the IV team, like the people who can like put an IV anywhere. And like, they were basically holding me down at this point. Like, I was just like, if one of you would just hold my arms so I don't hit anyone, because I can't control myself. But yeah, no, this is how I am. And I wish I wasn't this way. But this is what we have to work with. So when I told everyone around me that, like, this is get away, I wish some people had taken it seriously, or like we had come to some kind of understanding or arrangement based on my own, self-knowledge. But that is not the case. And my best friend moved from Senegal. Yeah, where he worked. He moved to from Senegal to Durham, North Carolina, to see me off into death. But he couldn't get from Senegal to Durham before they put my port in. So my other best friend had to fly from Maine to North Carolina to make sure that that my friends did this. They coordinated this whole thing because they knew I wouldn't do it on my own. That like, they needed to be there to make sure I walked through the door and didn't run away. And for that, I am eternally grateful to them. So like a week after I left the hospital, I had my port put in, and that was a hilarious experience because I remember asking the doctor, I was like, am I going to be asleep? And he gave me one of those doctor answers that was like so inhuman that it's like, were you raised in a cage in the dark? Were you raised by wolves? And right, it started with like conventional notions of sleep, and I'm like, dude, I want to know if I'm going to like have consciousness or not. Can you be a person? And he said to me, you'll be asleep. Well, I fucking wasn't. I was not asleep. And at one point, there's like a towel over my head. And at one point, I'm like, hello, I am under here. I feel some of these things. This is not what we talked about. And I remember a hand reaches under the towel and strokes my head and says, shh, it will be over soon. And yes, and so I left the hospital with my assigned medical escort, my friend Benjamin, and I don't know, this was early May. I think my first day of chemo was May 27th, 2021. I started FOLFIRINOX, which is a combination of drugs given to pancreatic cancer patients. And I mean, it's horrible. When they talk about pancreatic cancer patients dying because they can't, like, the treatment kills them, it's no joke. It's I know I just did that thing where I made you laugh at pancreatic cancer, and now I'm doing the thing where I make you feel serious about it, like right afterwards.
I can tell you what I'm thinking right now, that I record a lot of episodes at this point, and usually when we end up talking about terminal diagnoses, metastatic disease, we usually
Laugh.
usually it's not. I mean, it's funny, but not that funny. And there's a relatively serious tone to it, relatively inspirational tone to it, relatively like, this is how you live life in the last, if you have a terminal diagnosis. So that was like the mental model I was entering this conversation with, and that is not
okay, yeah, no, I am I'm not terribly dignified. I don't feel I yeah, this is how it happened.
This is honestly, Matthew, so I literally had a tear come down my like cheek right now, only because I was laughing that hard. Okay, so it was not a oh my god, this was not a sorry session at all.
No.
Just
I forgot to say, between chemotherapy and my port being put in, the other friend gets to the United States from Senegal, moves to Durham, and I'm still horribly depressed at this point. I remember I've been eating a lot of fast food after I got out of the hospital. A lot of fast food. And we have this meeting with my oncologist before I start chemo. And the thing I hate about caretakers, for me, is that they always ask the impertinent question. The question I don't want the answer to, because I want plausible deniability, because I want to eat fast food every day. And so when he's like, does he have to have any special diets? Does he have to be on a special diet? My oncologist is just like, if he wants to eat it, let him eat it.
That's great.
And that was awesome, because I ate Burger King for 20 days in a row. I made him take me to Burger King every day, and I got a BK fish sandwich, large, with onion rings, zesty sauce, and 2 cheeseburgers. And on day 21, he said, no, this is wrong, this is disgusting, and so at this point, I had started chemotherapy, and I could not get myself to Burger King, so I had to take a sabbatical from eating Burger King. It was incredibly difficult. FOLFIRINOX is no joke. And I forgot to mention that, like, so I had lost my job during COVID, moved to North Carolina, lost the job I got there, gotten diagnosed with cancer while I worked as a front-end manager at a grocery store to get myself back on my feet. I I kept that job through the first 5 months of chemo. So I worked on my feet 40 hours a week.
Oh.
And because like I didn't know about like money and health insurance, and I don't know anything. I have like 1,000 books, antique geography books, but like I don't know. I was terrified. So I mean, I had to wear like special gloves because if I touched cold things, the chemo made my like skin really sensitive. It was incredibly rough. I I don't say that because I want to, shine a light on how awesome and strong I am. I say it because like the system we have for dealing with people with terminal illnesses in the United States is literally, it is so inhuman and so ass backwards and so laughable. Do you know I finally got on disability as a 35 as a 32-year old. I think I got $872 a month from the government. Yeah. Thankfully, thankfully, my grandmother died at some point uh during my diagnosis, and left me a little bit of money that like helped me pay for things and live while I was unemployed and the government was giving me $800 a month. Fulfurinox did not work, and by September, my first CT and MRI, my tumor shrank slightly. And this is in a context where, like, they can barely see like, they know the tumor is there because they had to fucking see it with their eyes. But, like, it is notoriously difficult to visualize pancreatic tumors. And so they told me that like the like radiology report said the tumor shrank slightly, but my oncologist was like, it's so like imperceptible, that like we're maybe still at the starting line. And that was in the middle of the summer, and by September my tumor had grown and had spread to my liver, and things did not look good. And they, you know, my oncologist and my surgeon, they've both had to regroup from tremendous setbacks. And right, it's not whether you fail, right? It's like how you succeed after you fail. um and my oncologist was like, well, this is not working, and thank God it wasn't working, because at this point I could barely stand up by myself. The neuropathy was so bad. Like, I had just broken down earlier that day because I told my friend, I was like, I can, I don't think I can do more of this. I can't, I can't. And he said, are you sure? And I said, I know I can't get up out of the chair by myself right now. I need you to like hoist me on my feet. Um, and so I was put on my oncologist was like, we're going to try this other cocktail. And it was wildly successful. It was so successful that like after my first set of scans, like 3 months in, my oncologist, who was not confident that I would be a candidate for a Whipple again, and who told me in no uncertain terms that I had 1 to 3 good years left, he was like, if your other scan is this good in 3 months, I'm going to suggest that we try surgery again. And like 3 months later, there were no spots left on my liver. And there was not, they couldn't find evidence of cancer in my MRIs or CTs outside of my pancreas. And so about a year later, almost exactly 1 year later, my surgeon and I met under difficult circumstances where, I again refused to let them give me an epidural until I was asleep. And there was a wild negotiation back and forth because, I like to hyperfixate on the trivialities. I didn't care that that like a successful Whipple would be incredibly difficult to recover from. I didn't give a shit about that. I just am scared of needles. I made them access my port to knock me out. I made them access my port, and they didn't. They were like, we generally don't like to. And I was like, I don't care. You can. I will say that if you're like me and you make them access your port for surgery with the understanding that they'll give you an IV once you're asleep, you'll wake up with 12 IVs in your body. And they will be the sloppiest, nastiest IVs you've ever seen before. Like, I woke up, I swear, I had like 2 IVs in each arm, and there was like blood on my arms. So they did me dirty, but like, I did not care. I went in for surgery. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark outside. My sister drove me. And I woke up and my surgeon was like, success. He said that but they tested like 20 of my lymph nodes, and all of the tests were negative for cancer. I can't remember exactly what the like reports after the fact said, but I remember the way he described it to me. He was like, there was like, even the tumor was like no longer like it was like barely discernible as like live cancer. I don't know. It was good. It was good. It was not what I was expecting. I was expecting the other thing. And I still kind of expect the other thing. I Recovering from a Whipple is no joke. And, I will say, like, the great thing about being a 35-year-old with metastatic pancreatic cancer is that, the the benchmark for success is like pretty low. Like, I pooped like 7 hours after surgery, and I swear there were nurses in the room clapping. And I got up that day. They were like, we're gonna make you get up. And I don't know if you can tell by how rapidly I talk sometimes, but I've got a lot of nervous, anxious energy, and I pace a lot. And after a Whipple, like, you can't sleep, and I would pace the halls with I have pictures of me with the big old IV stand. And they tell you, we're going to make you walk. Like, it's going to be something you don't want to do. And in my case, it was something I really wanted to do. And they finally, they had to tell me, like, I think I was making people feel anxious because I would just pace back and forth in the hallway and look in all of the rooms. I got out of the hospital. I was in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. I got home. My caretaker and I had a falling out, and I did rehab by myself, and it was incredibly difficult. I basically, for all you folks listening at home who don't know, the surgery I had is basically they remove part of your pancreas, about I think a fourth of your small intestine, your gallbladder, a third of your stomach, and they basically like redesign your digestive system. And they sever the nerve that well, at least in my case, that like facilitates the emptying of your stomach. and your stomach is smaller. And so the real challenge for me was like to relearn how to eat again. And that's what I spent that summer doing. I had all kinds of like crazy hacks. Like I set, because they tell you eat small meals, and I didn't really know what a small meal was. One day, like one of my first meals was a peanut butter sandwich, and that peanut butter sandwich sat in my stomach for like 16 hours, and it was so incredibly painful. One of my first meals at home, left to my own devices. In the hospital, they were feeding me like Jello and Clear Ensure, and it was disgusting. Um, and yeah, I would eat a quarter of a hard boiled egg every hour and a half, and you finally retrain your digestive system to work. Now my stomach, I don't know how it does it, but it works. It empties, but it's quite a trial. It's not unlike the feeling of gastroparesis I had during chemo. And that all of you people considering Ozempic at home are like at risk for. I say that to people because like there is like people don't understand how much it hurts, how uncomfortable it is when your stomach won't empty. And so I mean, like, do whatever, right? I have no problem with Ozempic. It's just the that side effect is something that we trivialize, and it is incredibly uncomfortable. And that's my song and dance on that. Finally, I got well enough, and I was living basically a regular life, and I met with my oncologist, and I decided that I wanted to do more chemo after surgery. I felt like chemo was very uncomfortable for me, but like it was something I had like resigned myself to. I learned how to make it livable for me. And so having gone through all of this and terrorized myself and scared the crap out of myself, I didn't want it to be for nothing. So I did more chemo after treatment, after surgery, and that was brutal. I didn't, if the premise is that there's like little bits of pancreatic cancer maybe floating around my body, I was like, why not? I'm gonna complain anyway. Why not just do this? And it's not a choice, that it's not something that, I was young. I am young, and I felt like I could do that, and in retrospect, I could only barely do it. It is so brutal. The nausea and those kind of symptoms were especially brutal for me after surgery, and things like the anti-nausea meds they give you, they stopped working for me as effectively. And I did 3 or 4, I think I was supposed to do 4 more rounds or whatever, and I think I made it to 3, and I was like, I think this is enough. And then I started oral maintenance after that, and that is actually when Natalie and I started dating. Natalie and I we went to college together. She dated one of my friends in college. I've known her for like 16 years, and we would chat while I was sick. And but I was even though I was single, I thought I was, knocking on heaven's door. And so, it was very platonic. But like after surgery and after chemo. And my doctor was like, yeah, still the CTs are good. I shot my shot. And a few months later, I was visiting Nashville for the first, to see Natalie. And months after that, we moved in together, and now we live in a small house in Detroit, right outside of Detroit, with our little black pug, Monique.
Oh, look at that. I'm
Right?
full circle, Matthew.
I like to say that the worst thing in the world can happen to you, and you can come out of it, and the best thing in the world can happen to you. And that's how I like to think about this whole thing.
Matthew, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, I don't think I've laughed this hard ever on this show.
I appreciate that.
And most definitely not about metastatic disease. So I truly appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I would love to check in with you again and see how life is coming around. And maybe we can do like a part 2 or a part 3 to this episode.
It's been 18 months without evidence of recurrent metastatic disease. I'm still going strong.
Loving it.
So we'll see after the next one, but I'm bullish.
I like it. There we go.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I really appreciate it. Say hi to Natalie and Monique from us.
I will.
And we will talk to you soon.
This podcast, show notes, and newsletter is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or any materials linked from this blog is at the user's own risk. The content here is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.